afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and you have found us here, and we are so happy that you have found us here at Crime Time on a Mighty Blaze. I am your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 15 going on 16 novels of suspense and lots of wonderful news coming about the new book, but more about that when the time comes, because today we are here to celebrate the marvelous Ace Atkins and his brand new Don't Let the Devil Ride, which is just recently out. Ace has been on book tour. You all, this is a terrific book. Ace, you have a wonderful author voice. We'll talk about that in a minute. This book is smart and southern and different and free and kind of hilarious. And has wonderful action scenes, sort of international spy thriller meets PI novel meets domestic suspense. And it's fantastic. It's fantastic in every way. And we want to have Ace tell us all about this. Hey, Katie Crutchfield is here. Nice to see you. And Shannon Hansen and Deborah Pruss. And Emily is here, and Sharon Bishop and Susie Baldwin. The gang is all here. We are so happy that you are all here today to meet, or you probably already know Ace Atkins, for goodness sake, and we'll hear more about him in a moment. Ace, Susie Baldwin says hi, all the way from Washington State. How has your book tour been? Has it been amazing? Magical Mystery Tour.
It's been great. I've been able to go to some of my favorite bookstores, same places I think you and I both go to, the Poison Pen out in Scottsdale, and Murder by the Books in Houston, and Wichita, and Watermark. And so I've got to hit the greatest hits, I think.
It is the greatest hits. It's so much fun to see people in real life again and see how those marvelous independent bookstores are flourishing. Susie says she saw you on the back room. That's great and marvelous. What's it like when you have a new book, you've had 30 books or some number like that. Is there always that moment when you take your newest book out into the real world and there you are?
Well, I think it's exciting and a little bit, anticlimactic as well, because, as you know, Hank, this book is old. By the time that the book is out, I'm already working on a brand new project. So you almost have to go back and kind of familiarize yourself with what that past book that you finished. This book has been done for a year and a half, but it is exciting to finally let readers in on it. So you kind of hint about it, you talk about it a little bit online, but it's nothing like release date when people are actually devouring the book and getting the book. So that is a rewarding thing.
And you should know that Ace is in a really old building where the internet is not quite up to date, when the building is gorgeous and old, but the internet is brand new. So if he freezes or goes off the picture, it's fine. He'll be back. Don't worry about it. We are well aware of the vagaries of the internet, as you well know, because you have been with us at Crime Time. If you have not been with us, you should know that Crime Time started at the beginning of the pandemic 4 years ago, incredibly enough, begun by the powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to sort of keep us talking about books and keep us talking about reading and meeting wonderful favorite new authors, or maybe talking to someone who you already love, like Ace Atkins. And we have persevered. A couple of dozen volunteers persevered, and we are still going strong now. Today we are bringing you the fabulous Ace Atkins, whose new Don't Let the Devil Ride is just out, and Ace and his publisher are giving away a copy of this book. Not this one, because I am keeping this one, but giving away your brand new copy of this novel to one lucky commenter. So leave a question or a comment or just general admiration and applause for the fabulous Ace Atkins in the comments. And at the end, you know what will happen. We will spin the wheel of fun, and one of you will win this fabulous book. And the rest of you, you know what to do. Run, 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 and pick up your own copy of Ace Atkins, Don't Let the Devil Ride. Now, I know you know Ace Atkins, but let me tell you a little bit about him, just in case by some wackiness of the universe you don't know. Ace Atkins is an award-winning New York Times bestselling author who started his career as a crime beat reporter in Florida. So there's a job for you. Don't Let the Devil Ride is his 30th novel. His previous novels include 11 books in the Quinn Colson series and multiple true crime novels based on infamous crooks and killers. In 2010, he was chosen by Robert B. Parker's family to continue the iconic Spencer series. And if you haven't read his Spencer novels, if you haven't read the original Spencer novels, that is part of the lore of mystery fiction and not to be missed, I will tell you. Adding 10 novels to the franchise with his Spencer books. He lives in Oxford, Mississippi with his family, where he says, oh, it's not too hot outside today. Welcome, Ace Atkins. How are you?
Hey, thanks so much, Hank. And of course, you're very partial to those Spencer books because you occasionally make an appearance in them. You occasionally you have been an ally to Spencer in many very important cases, which is, it's funny when I was thinking about that when you would show up in the books, is if I were working a case as a private detective and I needed some information, some background, I would go to you. And so it wasn't just a tip of the hat. It was a tip of the hat, but it also was, I think, exactly what I would do because of your institutional knowledge of Boston.
Well, that is so kind of you. If you don't understand what Ace is talking about, in a couple of his Spencer novels, a reporter appears, Hank Phillippi Ryan.
No relation.
And no, yeah, exactly. Completely fiction. And she helps or doesn't help, I won't tell you, Spencer on his cases. And I'll have to tell you this, that I didn't know that Ace was doing this. I had no idea. So I'm on the plane flying from somewhere to somewhere with Ace's new book. And I open Ace's book and I'm reading it on the plane. And in the middle of the flight, I burst out laughing. I just burst out laughing when I hit the part that had my name in it because I didn't know. And the guy next to me says, that book must be really funny. And I said, well, there's one part of it that's really funny. And I told him the whole story. But that's one of the highlights of my life, I have to say, being in your books. Thank you.
Well, that was a perfect and a perfect fit in those stories. It's funny how that stuff works. I never met Parker, but as I said, I communicated with him and we wrote. I've got some great letters that I need to actually frame that I'm very proud of, where we had discussions about, Spencer, and particularly about Western movies. I think that's right when he was gearing up to start writing the Western books. And he was really gracious enough to blurb my first novel, and I was really appreciative of it. And I sent him a bunch of Southern spices, stuff from Louisiana, Cajun spices, because I knew, of course, Bob was famously a really big cook. He loved he had his own private kitchen, that kind of thing. And I never heard back from him, and I didn't take offense by it. I just knew how busy he was, and I'd never really thought that much about it. But I always kind of wondered I thought I'd get a note back from him or whatever. And for some reason, when I was working as a reporter, I missed one of his novels. I was too busy. The things were going crazy in Tampa. I just missed one of the Spencer novels. And years later, when I was actually writing the Spencer books, I went back to that book and read it for the first time. And in it, Spencer reaches up on the counter and he grabs some spices from a friend who's down in Mississippi or Louisiana who had sent him some spices. And I had no idea. I had no idea about it. And so apparently to people who knew Bob, that was very much like Bob to put a little nod in there. And it was a very cool thing to
little insider information. But I do have to say, did you burst into tears at that? I mean, it's like a message from him almost that you were meant to have at a certain time.
I was very moved by it. I really was. And I never, people have asked me questions about, writing for an estate. And if you do this, I mean, I have no interest in, I have my own career, my own books, my own series that I'm writing, but getting to work on those 10 books for Parker was a very personal thing. And I had a ball doing it. And as we were talking about before the show started, I was able to meet people and befriend and people that were in Bob's inner circle, and Joan Parker, Bob's wife, and his best friend Mel Farman. I wouldn't take anything for that in the world. And to be honest with you, I never told anybody this, but Boston was not a city I was very familiar with when I first started. And by the time I finished, I knew Boston very well. But what a great way of entering to get to know Boston through Bob's friends and his people that really helped me research and get to know the city. It was a lot of fun.
Well, Joan Parker, Bob's wife, absolutely loved you. She thought this was marvelous and that you were exactly the person to carry on this legacy. But you have a legacy of your own in many ways with the Quinn Colsons and your nonfictions and all the things that you write, including the brand new Don't Let the Devil Ride. So could I ask you just to set up this book for us?
Sure. So this started on a couple different fronts for me, which was the ability to really write anything. I had been writing 2 series for over a decade. I had been writing Spencer set in Boston, and I had been writing the Quinn Colson novels that are set here in North Mississippi, very deep South flavored books. And I wanted to do something completely different, and there was really no limit on what that could be. I could really work on any kind of project. So what I ended up doing was really crafting something you mentioned earlier, which it is a PI novel at some point, but it's also a domestic suspense novel. It's also an international thriller. And I didn't want any of those genre barriers. I wanted to write anything. So the setup is there's a woman named Addison McKellar, who's a woman of means in Memphis. Memphis is a town right up the road from where I live. I live in North Mississippi. It is my home city where I do business and fly out of, and where I visit. And this woman lives in a very nice neighborhood, old established neighborhood. She's been married for 15 years. She has 2 kids. Her husband owns this major construction company. She's very busy with being a stay-at-home mom and taking her kids to soccer practice and all that kind of stuff. But her husband he doesn't contact her for a few days on a business trip to London. And a few more days passed, and eventually it's a week. She calls the office. They try to placate her. They try to put her at arm's length. And finally, she gets fed up, and she drives to his office downtown where she hasn't been in some time. And she goes up to the floor where his office is, and the office is somebody completely different. It's an interior design firm. And she finds out this design firm has been there for 2 years. They have no idea about a construction company. They have no idea who this guy Dean McKellar is. And she kind of has a mental breakdown. Her car is towed. She's arrested because she's arguing with the cops about this being her husband's office. She can't get in touch with either the husband or his secretary, and her life begins to devolve. And so that's the entry point is through the character of Addison McKellar, is her really horrible, rotten, no good day. And that's what we step into.
Yes, indeed. And that is, it's such a marvelous and chilling scene when Addison realizes that every single thing in the world she thought was reliable and true and just wasn't true. That everything that her husband must have told her was not true. And she's very, and I don't want to say Southern, but she knows her situation in life. And she allows her husband to have the guys over and do things by themselves. And she tries not to be demanding, and she tries to stay pretty, and she tries to handle the kids. And she's sort of playing her role that she thinks she's been assigned in life, or that she's accepted. But she believes that her husband is doing the same thing. And clearly he's not. Where did that, and then we'll go, it is a great storyline. Randy says, sounds like a great storyline. It is. Where did the idea of your whole world falling apart come from, especially from a woman's point of view?
Well, I think, for us, that have had friends or, family members who've gone through divorces, where you find out so much that has been happening behind the scenes that they did not know about. And you wonder, how can you live with somebody and somebody can completely have a compartmentalized life that you're not a part of? But the other part of the story was influenced by the news and by stories that I covered, and white-collar criminals and con artists, and people who live these really twisted, dirty, criminal lives, but their spouses, in some cases, did not know what they were doing. And I don't mean just by them getting free of not having any kind of, connection to the crime, but I always wondered, there was one particular case where I covered a man who was a con artist who had done a lot of international business and some really shady things and dirty government contracts. And his wife really had no idea that he was a part of all this. And so the idea got to be, what would it like to be married to somebody like this? Like, what is that like when you finally discover everything in your life, this person's entire existence is a facade? And so that was the entry point.
I mean, it's fascinating because I did a lot of research on that very topic, coincidentally, for a book that I wrote a while ago. Very different kind of book. Yeah. But there's a project called something like, and don't hold me to this, something like the White Collar Project, which is run by a woman called Lucy, some name like Lawless, so this is maybe wrong, who did a big study on spouses of people who were eventually convicted of white-collar crimes, and something like 86% of the spouses found out about it when the feds arrived at the
right. Yeah, right. That doesn't surprise me at all. And in many of the cases that I'd cover as a journalist, that was absolutely the case. And it wasn't just the spouse being shielded; they really didn't know what their significant other was doing. And of course, that was always coupled with them having affairs. That was always but there were so many things that you would also find out. I know that there was one woman that I interviewed, and she was convinced that her husband was actually working for the CIA because he was doing all these trips down to Cuba. He had been doing this, and she was really convinced. And he told her, he said, I can't talk about it, but I'm actually working for the government, and that's why I can't tell you about these trips. It turns out he was just having all these affairs all over the world, and all these places where he was basically hiring prostitutes. But she believed him. She wanted to believe the lie.
Yes,
And,
and that, I think that's
really
really
men and women. I mean, the women, can be equally can fool the man and back and forth. But in this case, certainly was inspired by some of the men that I had covered, deeply involved in white collar crime.
and it comes through so gorgeously. If you just joined us, we're talking about Ace Atkins and his new "Don't Let the Devil Ride," and that and the Addison McKellar part of the book, and her husband Dean is sort of one element of the book, and that's the domestic suspense thread that goes through. But there are two other kinds of threads, and I'm going to be really careful about spoilers. But the other element, the other genre that's woven so seamlessly into this book is just a good old PI story. And I love Porter Hayes. Can you talk a little bit about him and his role?
So Porter Hayes was a character I think that I knew was going to be in this book even before I actually knew what the story was going to be. I wanted to create a character who was very much like what Spencer is in Boston. Somebody who had, for me, I wanted a character who had existed for quite some time, for many decades in Memphis. Somebody who had a storied history, somebody who had a great knowledge of the city and represented the city in the same way. When you think about Boston, you think about Spencer. I wanted to create somebody who was that equivalent in Memphis. So for that, Porter Hayes is a black man in his 70s. He is a Vietnam veteran. He was a young patrol officer working when Martin Luther King was killed in 1968. In the early 70s, he became a private detective. He actually worked on a case involving Elvis Presley. He kind of became the go-to, kind of, if you think about Shaft and those great movies, those Shaft movies from the 70s, he was kind of the Shaft of Memphis. And I tell people, I always think about Shaft as being a Memphis story, even though it's set in New York, because the music is all done by Isaac Hayes, and it was all produced and recorded in Memphis. But, one thing they didn't allow Richard Roundtree to do in Shaft was they never allow him to get old. And they didn't allow him to age and come to things with even a better knowledge than he did as a young man. And I always wanted to see what Shaft would have been like in his 70s. And so that's where Porter Hayes comes in.
That's the coolest idea. And I'm thinking Isaac Hayes, Porter Hayes.
Absolutely. There are two legendary songwriters at Stax, which if your viewers haven't seen this terrific documentary on HBO right now about Stax, which is just, they produced Booker T and MGs and Carla Thomas and Otis Redding and Johnny Taylor. The list goes on, Isaac Hayes. But the songwriting team of David Porter and Isaac Hayes were the soul of Stax. They were the ones who wrote all those hits. They wrote the song Soul Man. They wrote the song Hold On, I'm Coming. I mean, just everything. And so when I would be listening to my Memphis music, you would always come up, song would pop up, and it would say Porter Hayes on it, Porter Hayes. And for years, I'm talking about 20 years, I always thought, boy, that's a great name for a detective, a private eye, Porter Hayes. And I had the real wonderful experience of doing a book signing in Memphis a few weeks ago, and I look up, and there's David Porter himself. David Porter walked in. He's larger than life. I mean, he's just a legend. And I've met a lot of famous people and interesting people in my life, but that one just, almost made me freeze. What an honor to get to meet him. And
wait. So what did you say? And did you tell him about the character? And how did you?
He had seen me on TV earlier that day on the morning show on the CBS affiliate, and he just said, "I really appreciate you naming this character after me and Isaac." And I said, "Well, look, here's a book." I said, "You got to take a book." And he refused to take it from me. He would not take the book. And he bought a couple books, and he had me sign one for him and one for Isaac. Isaac Hayes has passed away, for Isaac Hayes' grandson. And so I signed it to Isaac the third, and I got some pictures with him. But it was a great moment and very cool in the way that world had influenced that book, because it certainly is a lot of the music and the feeling and the soul of what they did back in the 60s into the character of Porter Hayes. So it had kind of come full circle.
That is just like a message from the universe. You
It was
have to
awesome.
believe.
It was pretty awesome.
The idea. I'll confess that when I was in college, there was a record, records, you all. There was a record called Sam and Dave at the Stax Volt Review #2.
Excellent.
And I played that maybe 50 million times. It was Sam and Dave on that album. Sam and Dave sang "Try a Little Tenderness," and I have never heard a song that good in my life. And that is so to hear you talk about Stax Records is so nostalgic for me. Before we talk about
David Porter, a little footnote that David Porter and Isaac Hayes wrote almost. I don't believe they wrote. I think "Try a Little Tenderness" was an original Otis, but they wrote literally everything that Sam and Dave did. In fact, the story behind them is they were the real Sam and Dave. Is they would go out in the Memphis clubs and try out the music that they had been writing together, and then they would hand it over to Sam and Dave, and they were the touring act and that kind of thing. But the real Sam and Dave were really Isaac and David.
That's got to be your next book. I don't see how you cannot write that. We'll talk about music more in a little bit, because there's a music of your voice too, as well as the music of this novel. But we've talked about Addison and we've talked about Porter Hayes. Let's talk about Joanna Grayson, who has got to be one of the best characters. I mean, the other ones are fantastic, of course, and I know Porter Hayes is already iconic, but Joanna Grayson is fantastic.
Joanna would agree with you. Joanna, she's absolutely iconic and fantastic. Everything for me begins with the characters. And it is so hard, Hank, as you know, when you are working on a book or selling a book, when you're out there doing promotion and talking about, is everyone wants to shoehorn you into a particular kind of story. This is a domestic suspense. This is whatever. It's, and frequently when I explain this book, it's like, oh, it's a woman who's in love with her husband and her husband's missing and what has happened to him. And I have to explain, Addison doesn't really even like her husband that much. He's kind of a jerk, but it also is equally about characters. So there's Addison, there's Porter Hayes, and then there's Joanna. Joanna was an it girl of the 1960s in swinging London. She would have been part of the Austin Powers scene, in the mid 1960s, and hanging with the Stones and going to the clubs, and made a few, black and white hipstery films. And all of a sudden, at a very early age, she finds herself in Hollywood and signing a deal and getting her first acting gig is with a movie with Elvis Presley, a terrible film called Easy Come, Easy Go. And I chose that movie because it's probably maybe the most forgettable of all of the Elvis movies. And in fact, when I've been giving a talk about this book everywhere, I say, how many people have heard of Easy Come, Easy Go? Nobody has ever heard of it. I mean, I couldn't have done Viva Las Vegas or, something more famous. It was something very, very specific. But so Joanna worked with Elvis, and that essentially became the high point of her acting career. She ended up going back to London. She ended up making some horror pictures. She ended up making some softcore kind of porno movies, in Europe in the 80s. And all of a sudden in the 90s and early 2000s, she's not working as an actress anymore. She's working as an antique dealer in West Hollywood. And she has the idea to move her and her daughter, who is in her 20s, move them to Memphis, because that is a place where Joanna can again be somebody famous, because she feels like if she moves to Memphis, she can go to these Elvis conventions, she can appear at Graceland, and people will fawn upon her. And they do to a certain extent, but it's also a very tough road for her. And she's hawking this self-published book she's written called One Night with You, the Joanna Grayson story. And times are tough until certain events happen in books.
I mean, she's so poignant. She's such a poignant and believable character. I actually looked up Easy Come, Easy Go because I thought, is that a real movie? And there's a character in it. I wrote this down. It's something like a go-go dancing yoga teacher.
Yes, yeah, there is. There's a big scene where Elvis is doing yoga in it. It's a musical number called Yoga Is As Yoga Does. And it is not Elvis's finest moment. But if you're into Sunken Pirate's Treasure and you ever wanted to see Elvis be a scuba diver, this is your movie.
Yeah, I think raise your hand. Oh, I don't see any hands. No.
As you can imagine, this was one of Elvis's last films.
But Elvis and Memphis, I mean, that's so intrinsically connected. Can you talk a little bit about, that part of your story?
Well, Memphis is a complicated place, and it's somewhere where, there's certain things, with Boston, like, how many times do you see a movie about Boston? And, what do you have? You've got, you know,
The harbor and the
lobster.
state house
Yeah,
and
yeah, right. It's got, all the cliches of Boston, and everybody's from Southie, and, all this stuff. So me being here and living in Memphis, there were certain things I want to stay away from, certain cliches. But that much said, it's really inescapable to write about Memphis and not talk about Elvis. You really cannot. Elvis is such a spiritual presence in this town. So the main way I wanted to do it was write it in a different kind of way and from a different perspective. And Joanna really was the perfect person to write about, as somebody who's on kind of the movie nostalgia circuit, and somebody that people just wanted to meet because she had known Elvis. She had worked with Elvis, and she really felt like she had a deep spiritual connection with him. And so Elvis is kind of a character in the book, but via Joanna.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I love, that we understand that sort of fandom.
Yeah.
And there was an expression in the book that I'd never heard before, Death Week.
There's Death Week. Death Week is right in a few weeks. Death Week, Elvis died on August 16th. And on the week of August 16th, when it falls, people come from all over the world. And in fact, many of them are from Europe. They tend to be more European, and more people from the UK than anything, come here for a week of concerts and, tributes and panel discussions on Elvis. There'll be, Elvis's jeweler will be here, Elvis's spiritual advisor. There was a guy that played with Elvis in his band from 1971 to 72. He'll be speaking about Elvis. So it's anything, and of course, over the years, I've been here for 25 years, that list is unfortunately getting shorter and shorter. Mm-hmm. And so the people who really knew Elvis, they're not with us anymore. But I did have over the years, I've got to hang out with some very interesting people who did know Elvis very well.
And I love Joanna's daughter, Tippy.
Yeah.
Named after Tippi Hedren, who she'll remind you was her dear friend.
Yes, very close. Dear friend.
Talk about that banter and that relationship, the mother-daughter relationship.
It's funny. I think at some point in this book, there's a lot about mothers and daughters in this book. And I don't have a daughter, so I don't know where that came from. But it does seem to be a core point, both with Addison and her teenage daughter and with Joanna and Tippy. But I think, Tippy is always looking to kind of take Joanna down a peg, because Joanna is, you could have, for somebody like Joanna at one point being the it girl, being somebody that was so beautiful and charismatic that they bring you to Hollywood and you're in magazines and you're making a movie with Elvis and you're, hanging out with Keith Richards and everything is crazy. And then all of a sudden, you're having to go to a fan convention on Elvis Presley Boulevard and get a piece of lasagna off of a hot plate, how far it's fallen. And I think, Tippy really sees Joanna for the tragic character that she is. And I think she loves her mother very much, but she kind of blames her for the plight that they find themselves in, which is really eking out a living in Memphis.
And that, I'll ask you one more question about that, and then we'll go on.
I love talking about Joanna.
Well, it's interesting because that haunted by a lost past element of a novel is so Southern literary, the sort of Blanche Dubois element of that she once was beautiful and now no more, and she's trying to get it back. Can you talk a little bit about, your voice is so Southern, and everything about this book, the people's dialogue and the setting but also the themes are Southern and the feel is Southern. What does that even mean, really? Is that something that's top of mind to you, or is that natural to you, or some of each?
I think it's just natural to me. I don't necessarily go to, in fact, I don't necessarily, this is a very Southern book. And I think people, and I don't really think about it. I go, well, it's Memphis. So, Memphis and Atlanta they are Southern, but they're, it's not like writing, deep in the, the very deepest of Alabama or something like that. They're still major cities, but yeah, I think there's some themes and ideas that I put in the books that are just probably just natural to the locations. Of course, for the voice, Joanna is not Southern. Joanna is British. So, I really tried to make sure that her feel and her her voice was very, very distinct. And that's really what I want with all the characters. I really don't like when I read a book and, we're switching point of views, we're getting to different heads, but we're not necessarily finding anything unique about that character. And I would like you to know that character, even if I don't mention their name. And I'd like for you to, if you're reading a chapter with Joanna, and I never tell you it's Joanna, you should know that it's her. Same thing with Porter Hayes, is to make Porter Hayes as authentically Memphis as possible, to make him not only sound like Porter Hayes in his dialogue, but the way he's thinking. And each chapter in this is specific, whether it's Addison, and they're all very different people. And that's the fun for me. It's kind of like being, it's like being an actor. I mean, it's just getting deeply in the character of all these people. So at the very best that I hope when I'm starting a book or when I'm in a book is that I am deeply rooted with those people before I begin. And then the story will shake out.
And you know that Joe and that Addison runs to Daddy. And I want all of you to read.
That's true. Another very Southern thing. This thing's just inherently. Yeah, her father. So Addison, when you first meet her, and I think when I first met her, I think I had a certain vision of kind of a woman being very spoiled. We've all had these people, and whether they're in Boston or Memphis, driving these huge luxury cars, and they cut you off in traffic, and very privileged, and that's kind of how I initially thought about Addison. But later you find out, she has an interesting past with her family. Her family is one of the oldest Lebanese families that's in the Mid-South. Her father owns a very popular Southern restaurant, a barbecue place. He is deeply Lebanese. Her mother was not. And he's dying. He's sick. He's ill. He's, and frequently, I think with some books, people don't have any other problems other than what's facing them. And at some point, Addison, the fact that her husband is missing is a major problem for her, but she's got other stuff going on. She's dealing with unruly kids. That never really stops. She's also dealing with this impending death of her father. And her father is actually the one who has been in Memphis for such a long time. He knows the one man who probably can help his daughter out, and that's Porter Hayes.
And speaking of Porter Hayes, and I want you all to meet him, we're talking about Ace Atkins, Don't Let the Devil Ride. And one of the most hilarious characters is Porter Hayes' secretary, who is the funniest person in the world. Let me ask you one more question. So you've got this wonderful domestic suspense, this wonderful PI novel, and also it's a really action-filled international spy thriller. It's not only Memphis, but Paris and Dubai. It's an international caper thriller. How do you talk a little bit about that, and how you so seamlessly made, sort of the Ace Atkins genre of all these things together?
Well, I love those movies that really have a mashup of somebody who finds themselves in the middle of a crazy international conspiracy. And it could have been an old Doris Day film. It could have been a Hitchcock movie, but you find somebody who's, probably the best example of all of that. And the movie that I kept in mind mostly when I was writing this book was Charade. And Charade.
That's the stamp?
Yes. Yeah. And Charade is just a delight. I mean, it's Audrey Hepburn, Cary Grant, and it's just, the music is fantastic, and it's all in Paris, but it's a crazy international caper. It's about a gold shipment that was stolen during the war and her husband's connection to what had happened. And so Charade weighed on me a lot when I was writing this book. But I was sitting here writing, and I'm writing about Memphis, and I said, there's really no reason why this book can't be any bigger. There's a reason this could be Memphis, could be Egypt. And so I write a scene that's in Cairo, at the Four Seasons in Cairo, and it just was fun. But it reminded me of books that I had grown up with in the 80s, even like, Robert Ludlum. Those books were not necessarily very funny. They weren't really comedic. They were the fun kind of globe hopping adventures. And I think for me, where I was really doing things that were very neatly slotted into Southern voice stories that were set in North Mississippi, I find that storytelling is applicable anywhere. I mean, it doesn't, my writing is the writing, I could write in Moscow, it's still going to be my voice. And so that was kind of a freeing experience.
Yes, freeing. I think that is a wonderful word for this, because you've never read an Ace Atkins book like this, and yet you recognize the Ace Atkins voice and the Ace Atkins humor and tenderness and thoughtfulness and storytelling ability just really shines through. One last question from the audience, and I don't want this to go by without me asking this. It was just the same that I was going to ask. Someone was asking who, oh, I see, Julie Brinkley says, speaking of actors, who do you see playing Porter and Addison if it were to be optioned for film? Anything you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it has been optioned for a film. It was actually not that far off my desk when it went to an auction in LA last year. And so it's in high development. It's not just being talked about. It's in development right now. It's funny. When I wrote this book, I always thought about Richard Roundtree, who passed away last year. And I thought, boy, if we could get Richard Roundtree back to play Porter Hayes, that's who I had in my mind. Of course, you're always going to hear like Samuel L. Jackson. Those.
Denzel.
Denzel. This is being adapted as a TV show, and so I don't know. Denzel, unfortunately, doesn't do much television or any television anymore.
You could get Idris Elba.
He's maybe a little young, but he would be terrific. He's good in everything. Addison, boy, I think about like what's her name, Kaylee Cuoco, who's in The Flight Attendant. She's really great and kind of manic and a good comedic actress. Somebody who really can go all out there and kind of embrace everything that's happening to Addison and be funny at the same time.
There are lots of people to choose from.
Sure.
That'll be so exciting. Is there a timetable? Can I push you?
I don't know. There is a showrunner right now and head writer who's working on the development of the series right now and is working on episodes. But it would be a show as what's happening right now, not a feature, but it would be a TV series really centered around Porter Hayes. And that first season would all be about Addison. And so it would all be about this story. Don't Let the Devil Ride would be the first season.
Speaking of which, where did that title come from?
A lot of a lot of work. It was not the original title. The original title was Suspicious Minds, for the Elvis song. And for some reason, I think that some people were not keen on that because it could be you either hear Elvis in your head the way I do, or you hear it as very heavy-handed, like Criminal Minds or something like that. So we went through a lot of titles, but it's an old gospel song.
Oh.
And it's something that has been recorded 1,000 times, very famous old gospel song. Nobody even knows who wrote it. And it came to a part in the book where actually when the book got the official title, there's a very pivotal moment when something really awful happens. And Deacon Malone, who's the sidekick of Porter Hayes, reminds Porter Hayes of this old gospel song, like, what happens when you let that devil ride. And so it worked out perfectly to be the title of the book.
Yes, it really did. I mean, and it is so Southern and so deep and has such a history to it that it is lovely. And also, even Deacon saying that to Porter Hayes gives them a history and gives them a heritage, and it's all just Ace Atkins wonderful. We've been talking about Don't Let the Devil Ride by Ace Atkins, and it's time for some questions from you fabulous people in the audience. Who has a question for Ace Atkins? Renee says, can you tell us anything about what you're currently working on?
Sure, Renee. I'll talk about it. This is a book that I'm working on for next year. I'm in the final stages of it, but it is very much in the feel of Don't Let the Devil Ride. It's not set in Memphis. It's set in Atlanta, and it is a spy novel. And so it is the spy elements and the international intrigue that you find in Don't Let the Devil Ride have been turned up a little bit, and very influenced by what I used to read as a kid back in the 80s with Lynn Dayton and Ludlum and Ian Fleming and all that. So, but it's also a comedy too. It's still it's a comedic thriller, but set against the world of espionage.
See, you are in this, the sort of The Man Who Knew Too Much charade, all suspicion, all those kinds of things that are
suspicion. You nailed it exactly, Hank. That's all where I'm coming from, and it kind of throws people. I say, well, what are you working on? I say, well, I'm working on a spy novel, and I think they instantly think it's like Jack Ryan or something like that. It's like, no. It's like charade or suspicion and Man Who Knew Too Much, North by Northwest. That's where those are very funny movies. They're very,
hilarious. They're droll and wry and insidey all throughout. Blue says, what is the strangest thing Ace has learned about Elvis from his research or talking to those who knew him?
Well, that's a good question, Blue. There's one part in the book that I think was too weird for even my editor, and it was absolutely a true story. A lot of people don't know that Elvis had a pet monkey, or an ape, chimpanzee, and his name was Scatter. And he had been apparently, back in the 50s, where there was a lot more local programming. There was a kids show, and the host of the kids show had this monkey Scatter. And in Memphis, as they were doing a lot of local promotion, that kind of thing, he had a car that was outfitted that he had a steering wheel on the passenger side, and on the driver's side was a phony steering wheel. So he would set up Scatter to look like he was driving a car, and then the TV host, as he was promoting this kids show, would drive down beneath, and Scatter would wave to people. So anyway, Scatter got to be too much for this guy to handle, and he asked Elvis if he wanted to take him on. And Elvis, of course, never, not always making the best decisions in his life, said sure. And he took Scatter in the 60s and took him to Palm Springs. And he is not, by today's standards or any standards whatsoever with being good to animals. Scatter became an alcoholic. He would drink. Apparently he could just turn up a bottle of booze and finish half of it. He smoked. He was a smoker and was known to run around and occasionally inappropriately touch women at parties, which the Memphis Mafia thought that was very funny, but of course was very inappropriate. And so Scatter, there was a few scenes with Scatter in this book, and I think I got my wonderful editor at Morrow, Emily Crump, wrote me a note. She said, "I think we've had enough Scatter stories." so at least I can relay that to you, Blue. That's my gift right there.
Blue, you didn't know that you were going to get this perfectly great story, and I think we've seen enough Scatter. I think becomes sort of a phrase that we can use throughout, just no matter what we're referring to.
Absolutely,
that's so great. Who else has a question? Do you have a pub day ritual? Says Katie. Hey, Katie.
No, I don't. Well, I guess I do have a pub day ritual. That's not true. So I live here in Oxford, Mississippi, which is exactly the way you imagine. It's a beautiful little southern town. I'm looking out. You can't see my window, but I'm looking at my window, and it's the old courthouse. It looks like To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's ringed by these old buildings. It was built rebuilt after the Civil War, and it has one of the best bookstores in the country, which is Square Books. And Square Books is a legendary independent bookstore. It's been open since the late 70s. Everybody who has been there, I mean, it's a place where all the legends and the legendary Southern writers have come. And so we launched the book there for each time. And it's a great time that people come from all over the Mid-South and come from Memphis and other states and all over. And we, one year when I was writing the Quinn Colson books, we had the fictional county that I read about is called Tibahaw County. And we had what we called a Tibahaw County picnic with a band and food and cocktails. And so that's kind of the tradition is launching into Square Books.
That is, what a good story that is too. And what a moment in time to link all of your books together. I know we're running out of time. One last question, you all. Let's have one last question before, hi, Emily says, how and why did you start writing true crime PI novels? Different things.
I think I knew, I think it was just what I was reading and what really moved me. And I did start off reading espionage. I think as a young person in the 80s, I mean, that's what was really popular. And so I really developed a love for that genre. But when I got out of that, I started finding Elmore Leonard and Hammett and Chandler and first and foremost, Robert Parker. I mean, let's face. I mean, I found Parker before I found Chandler, and started reading those books. And I was like, boy, this is good stuff. This is what I want to write. And if you had, when I was in high school and college, I mean, I always had a Parker book on me. I idolized Parker, Elmore Leonard, all that. And then at the same time, I went to school at Auburn University. I was fortunate enough to have some really wonderful professors who were experts in Southern literature. So I was, reading Flannery O'Connor and all kinds of weird Southern stuff. And it just got to be kind of a mashup that when I started writing, after a number of years of being a crime reporter, it just was exactly the genre. I never really considered writing another genre. That's what I liked. That's what I was into.
I mean, it's interesting. Everyone says, write the kind of book you love to read, and that's it's almost exciting. It's just, that's what your story.
Well, I think you're doomed to fail in any way if you're not passionate about it. And you'd be surprised, Hank, and I'm sure you hear from people all the time. They say, well, I want to write this book because I think it'll sell, or this is not the business you get into. if that's your goal. I mean, goal is to entertain. We're entertainers, and you have to be passionate about, so I write the exact book, and I know you do too, the kind of book you want to read and what you're into, and hopefully that passion for it will bleed through.
Of course. And talk about entertaining. Don't Let the Devil Ride. Absolutely entertaining. A wonderful vacation book, a wonderful airplane book, a wonderful curl up on your couch in the air conditioning and just fall into the pages. It is a wonderful adventure. And you will, at the end, well, I won't tell you how you'll feel at the end, but you will love it and you won't be able to wait for the next book. I'm looking over here. Here's Deborah Pruss is here, and Renee is here, and Brenda Gaskell is here. Kathy says she's a Hotlanta girl. Kathy Hamdy Swink says, so when you come to Atlanta, you can come say her. And Deborah Pruss is here. Susie Baldwin. Tori T says, sounds like the book would make a wonderful show. Grace says, wonderful, fabulous discussion. This is terrific. You all are marvelous, and so marvelous that we'll now spin the wheel of fun. Wait till you see this, Ace. It's awesome. And we'll spin the wheel of fun, your International Man of Mystery, to see who wins the prize. And the winner is... Isn't that great? You have to love it. And the winner is... Oh, no, A Mighty Blaze cannot win. This is Chuck.
It's rigged. The system is rigged.
The system is rigged. Really, Chuck really wants this book. So no. You can get your own book, Chuck. Here we go. We'll spin it one more time. And the winner is Kathy Hamdy Swink. All right, the Hotlanta girl, who is a marvelous author in her own right and a wonderful fan of Crime Time. So, Kathy, you email me and we'll get you. Well, you'll email me. I'll email the executive producer, and they'll email Ace's publicist, and then you'll get your book, because that's how this works. Lucky you. The rest of you, you know what to do. Run, click, and get your copy of Don't Let the Devil Ride. Square Books has signed copies of this book. We have that link in the chat if you'd like to get a signed copy by Ace Atkins of Don't Let the Devil Ride. It is one click away. Ace, thank you for being with us today and taking all the time to be here.
My pleasure. And Hank, if I have just a moment to thank you, you have been an incredibly supportive and wonderful friend during the launch of this book, and that certainly has not gone unnoticed and greatly appreciated. So thank you very much, my friend, for everything you have done.
Oh my goodness, my complete pleasure. Now I'm wearing waterproof mascara, so I can cry. All right, you all. Next week, do not miss. Come here at 4 p.m. ET on Tuesday to hear from the marvelous May Cobb and her seductive Hollywood novel, The Hollywood Assistant. This is an early copy. You see, it doesn't even have a real cover, but I will show you the real book next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, and you will get the fun of meeting one of the most fun people in the world and a fantastic writer, May Cobb, with her new book. I mean, look at that cover. Somebody's watching her. The Hollywood Assistant, next week at 4 p.m. ET here on Crime Time. And until then, you know what I always say. Remember, it is always safe inside a book. Love you so much.